You know that moment when your entire world collapses in 30 seconds? When everything you believed about love, sacrifice, and family gets shattered by a single toast at a graduation ceremony? Well, I'm about to tell you exactly how that feels, because it happened to me just 3 months ago, and I'm still picking up the pieces. My name is Delphine Moreau, and for 18 years, I kept the biggest secret of my life. A secret that cost me everything I had, everything I earned, and ultimately, everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. But before I tell you about the day my heart broke in front of hundreds of strangers, let me take you back to where it all began. Picture this: a 23-year-old woman fresh out of art school, madly in love with a computer programmer who promised her the world. That was me in 2001, naive enough to believe that love conquers all, and optimistic enough to think that starting a family young was romantic rather than reckless. Bastian Hartwell was everything I thought I wanted in a partner back then. Stable job, ambitious goals, and a way of making me feel like I was the most important person in his world. We got married 6 months after I graduated, and Kieran was born 2 years later. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But perfection, I learned, is a fragile thing. Bastian's career took off just as mine was getting started. He landed a lucrative position with a tech startup just as the dot-com boom was reaching its peak. Meanwhile, I was struggling to build a freelance graphic design business while caring for a toddler. The balance we had promised each other began to shift, and not in my favor. By the time Kieran was 5, cracks were showing in our marriage. Bastian worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, and began treating my career as a hobby rather than a legitimate business. When I suggested we needed better child care arrangements so I could take on bigger clients, he told me I should be grateful that his salary was enough to support the family. When I complained about feeling isolated and undervalued, he accused me of being ungrateful for the comfortable life he was providing. The final straw came when I discovered he had been having an affair with a colleague. Not just a fling, but a full-blown relationship that had been going on for over a year. When I confronted him, instead of apologizing or trying to work things out, he told me he had found someone who appreciated his success instead of resenting it. The divorce was brutal. Bastian hired the best family lawyer money could buy, while I scraped together what little I had for legal representation that was barely adequate. He painted me as an unstable artist who couldn't provide the kind of stable environment Kieran needed. He pointed to my inconsistent income, my small apartment, my unconventional work schedule as evidence that he was the better parent. And you know what? The court believed him. Because in 2009, a man with a 6-figure salary and a suburban house was considered more suitable for raising a child than a woman with artistic aspirations and financial uncertainty. I was granted supervised visitation initially, which was later upgraded to weekends and alternating holidays when it became clear that I wasn't the unfit mother Bastian had portrayed me as. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning in Portland, Oregon. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment, staring at another college tuition bill that had arrived in the mail. The amount made my stomach churn. $47,000 for 1 semester at Stanford University. My son Kieran's dream school, and apparently my financial nightmare. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a single mother working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water, while my ex-husband Bastian lived in his pristine suburban house with his new wife Cordelia, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd been secretly funding our son's entire college education. You see, when Bastian and I divorced 8 years ago, he fought tooth and nail for custody of Kieran. He had the better lawyer, the stable income, the picture-perfect new family. I was just a struggling freelance graphic designer with inconsistent income and a 1-bedroom apartment in the less desirable part of town. The court awarded him primary custody, and I got weekends and alternate holidays. But what Bastian didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had been working myself to the bone to pay for Kieran's education. Every penny I earned from my graphic design business, every dollar from my weekend job at the farmer's market, every cent from my evening shifts doing bookkeeping for local businesses, It all went toward one thing: making sure my son could attend the best schools without anyone knowing it came from me. The decision to secretly fund Kieran's education hadn't been made lightly. It started when he was in 8th grade and began talking about wanting to attend Stanford, just like his father had. Bastian would nod approvingly and make vague promises about making it work financially. But I could see the numbers didn't add up. His salary was good, but not Stanford tuition good, especially not when he was also supporting Cordelia's expensive taste in home renovations and luxury vacations. So I started planning. I researched financial aid options, scholarship opportunities, and payment plans. And slowly, carefully, I began setting up a system that would allow me to fund Kieran's education without anyone knowing it came from me. It required establishing myself as an anonymous benefactor through Stanford's development office, creating a fictional scholarship fund that would appear to supplement Bastian's contributions. The deception was elaborate but necessary. I convinced the Stanford Financial Aid Office to list me as an anonymous educational supporter, contributing to Kieran's education fund. Officially, the money appeared to come from a merit-based scholarship program for children of technology workers. Bastian believed his own savings and this mysterious scholarship were covering everything. Kieran never questioned it. Why would he? His father had always been the responsible one, the successful one, the one with the stable career in software development. I remember the day Kieran got accepted to Stanford. He called Bastian first, of course. I heard about it through a text message that simply said, "Got into Stanford, Mom. Dad says he's so proud he managed to save enough for my tuition." My heart broke and swelled at the same time. Broke because Bastian was taking credit for sacrifices he never made. Swelled because my son was going to get the education he deserved, even if he never knew where it really came from. The financial arrangement was complex but necessary. I had convinced the Stanford Financial Aid Office to list me as an anonymous benefactor, contributing to Kieran's education fund. Officially, the money appeared to come from a scholarship program. Bastian believed his own savings and some mysterious scholarship were covering everything. Kieran never questioned it. Why would he? His father had always been the responsible one, the successful one, the one with the stable career in software development. Meanwhile, I was living on ramen noodles and instant coffee, wearing the same 5 outfits in rotation, and sleeping on a mattress I'd bought secondhand 4 years ago. My social life was non-existent. Dating was out of the question. Every decision I made revolved around one goal: keeping Kieran's tuition payments current. Let me paint you a picture of what my life looked like during those 4 years. My alarm went off at 5:30 every morning. I'd spend 2 hours working on graphic design projects before most people were even awake, usually while drinking coffee that was more water than actual coffee grounds, because the good stuff was too expensive. By 8, I'd shower quickly, and I mean quickly because hot water cost money, and head to my day job at a small marketing firm downtown. The marketing firm paid the bills, barely, but it was steady income, and in my world, steady income was more valuable than good income. I'd work there until 5, then rush home to grab dinner, usually something microwaved or a peanut butter sandwich, before heading to my evening shift. 3 nights a week, I did bookkeeping for local restaurants and small businesses. The work was tedious, and the offices were often cramped and poorly lit, but it paid cash and didn't require a long-term commitment that might interfere with my other obligations. Thursdays and Fridays, I worked at a call center doing customer service for an online retailer. The work was soul-crushing, but it paid $14 an hour, which was more than I could make almost anywhere else with my schedule constraints. Weekends were for the farmers market. I had a small booth where I sold custom logos and business cards to local vendors, and I also helped other vendors with their displays in exchange for a small fee. Saturday and Sunday, 6 in the morning until 6 at night, standing on my feet, smiling at customers, pretending that I wasn't calculating every transaction in terms of how much closer it brought me to next month's tuition payment. The rain kept pattering against my small window as I calculated this semester's payment. I would need to take on another client. maybe pick up some additional weekend shifts. My friend Marielle had offered me a job at her catering company, working wedding receptions on Saturday nights. The pay was decent, and I could probably manage the extra hours if I gave up what little sleep I was already getting. My phone buzzed with a text from Kieran. "Hey Mom, just wanted to let you know I made Dean's List again. Dad's taking me and Cordelia out to celebrate at that fancy steakhouse downtown. Wish you could join us, but I know you're busy with work." I stared at that message for a long time. Kieran was 21 now, a senior at Stanford studying computer engineering, just like his father. He was brilliant, kind, and completely unaware of the sacrifices being made for his success. In his mind, his father was the hero of his story, the man who had worked hard and saved diligently to provide him with the best education money could buy. Part of me wanted to tell him the truth. Part of me wanted him to know that every late night I spent hunched over my computer, designing logos for small businesses or updating websites for local restaurants, was for him. That every weekend I spent on my feet for 12 hours at farmers markets or wedding receptions was so he could focus on his studies instead of worrying about student loans. But I couldn't, because Kieran loved his father, looked up to him, wanted to be just like him. And despite everything Bastien had put me through during our divorce, despite the way he had painted me as unstable and unreliable in court, I couldn't bring myself to destroy my son's image of him. So I typed back, "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Have a wonderful dinner." What I didn't type was, "I'm proud of you, and I'm the reason you don't have to worry about paying for any of this." That night, I worked until 3 in the morning on a website redesign for a local bakery. The payment would cover about 1/3 of next month's tuition installment. As I finally crawled into bed, exhausted and running on my 4th cup of coffee, I allowed myself a moment of bitterness. Bastien was probably tucking into a perfectly prepared steak at that moment, basking in Kieran's admiration, accepting praise for being such a dedicated father. Meanwhile, I was surviving on generic cereal and the free samples I could grab during my farmer's market shifts. But tomorrow, I would get up and do it all again. Because that's what love looks like sometimes. It's not grand gestures or public recognition. Sometimes love is silent sacrifice, invisible support, and the willingness to let someone else take credit for your devotion. I had no idea that in just a few months, everything would change. That my carefully constructed secret would unravel in the most public and humiliating way possible. That the son I had sacrificed everything for would unknowingly break my heart in front of hundreds of people. If I had known what was coming, would I have done anything differently? Would I have told Kieran the truth years ago? Would I have demanded recognition for my sacrifices? I honestly don't know. But I'm about to find out exactly how much heartbreak a person can endure when love meets betrayal at a graduation ceremony that was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. 3 months later, I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, trying to figure out how to look presentable for my son's Stanford graduation with a budget of exactly $43. That's what I had left after making the final tuition payment the week before. 4 years of college paid in full, and I was broke down to my last few bills. The dress I was wearing had been my interview outfit for the past 6 years. A simple black sheath dress that I'd bought at a discount store and carefully maintained through countless dry cleaning sessions I could barely afford. It was starting to show its age, but it was still respectable enough for such an important day. My hands were shaking as I applied the drugstore lipstick I'd been stretching for months. This was it. This was the day I had been working toward for 4 years. Kieran was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer engineering, and he had already accepted a position at a prestigious tech company in San Francisco. Everything I had sacrificed for had led to this moment. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, addressed to Ms. Delphine Moreau in Kieran's careful handwriting. Inside, along with the standard graduation announcement, was a handwritten note. "Mom, I hope you can make it. I know things have been tough financially for you, but this day wouldn't mean anything without you there. I've reserved you a seat in the family section. Love, Kay." That note had made me cry for 20 minutes. Not because of the acknowledgement of my financial struggles, though that stung, but because despite everything, despite the fact that he lived with his father and stepmother, despite the fact that I only saw him every other weekend and some holidays, he still wanted me there for the most important day of his young adult life. What Kieran didn't know was that his financially struggling mother had spent every penny she earned for the past 4 years ensuring this day would happen. What he didn't know was that I had turned down countless social invitations, potential relationships, and even a few better job opportunities because they would interfere with my ability to maintain the payment schedule that kept him in school. The drive from Portland to Palo Alto took me nearly 12 hours. I couldn't afford to fly, and I definitely couldn't afford a hotel room, so I had planned to drive down the night before, sleep in my car in a Walmart parking lot, and drive back immediately after the ceremony. It wasn't glamorous, but it would get me there. My car, a 2008 Honda Civic with over 200,000 miles on it, had been making concerning noises for the past month. The engine had developed a grinding sound that my mechanic friend Thomas warned me was probably the transmission beginning to fail. He offered to look at it for free, but even with his labor donated, the parts would cost at least $1,500. Money I simply didn't have until after graduation expenses were behind me. Every time I turned the ignition, I whispered a little prayer that it would start. Every time I heard that grinding noise on the highway, I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and promised myself that after Kieran graduated, I would finally be able to take care of my own needs. For 4 years, I had been deferring maintenance on everything in my life: my car, my health, my living situation, even basic dental care, because every available dollar had to go toward tuition. The truth was, I was exhausted. Not just physically, though working 60 to 70 hours a week for 4 years had definitely taken its toll. I was emotionally exhausted from carrying this secret, financially exhausted from living paycheck to paycheck, despite working constantly, and spiritually exhausted from watching my son give credit to his father for sacrifices I was making. But I was also proud that I had managed to keep up with the payments despite everything. Proud that Kieran was thriving at Stanford, making friends, excelling academically, preparing for a successful career. Proud that he would graduate debt-free, something that would give him a tremendous advantage as he started his adult life. The graduation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday in late May. California weather was perfect, sunny and warm, with a light breeze that made the campus feel like something out of a movie. Stanford University was everything I had imagined and more. The sandstone buildings, the palm trees, the sense of academic excellence that seemed to emanate from every corner of the campus. I had visited Kieran here exactly once during his 4 years, during his sophomore year, when he had been hospitalized with appendicitis. Bastian and Cordelia had been traveling in Europe at the time, some romantic anniversary trip to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary, and the hospital had called me as the emergency contact. I had driven through the night to be with him, spent 3 days sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs, and had driven back to Portland as soon as he was released. During that visit, Kieran had been grateful, but also embarrassed. Embarrassed that his broke mom had to come rescue him when his successful dad was unavailable. He had apologized for the inconvenience, promised to pay me back for the gas money, and assured me that next time he would make sure to call his father first, even if he was traveling. The casual dismissal of my sacrifice, the assumption that my time and effort were less valuable than his father's vacation, had stung more than I cared to admit. Now, walking across the campus towards the graduation ceremony, I felt like an imposter. Everywhere I looked, I saw families dressed in expensive clothes, carrying professional cameras, laughing and celebrating together. I saw fathers in tailored suits and mothers in designer dresses, looking every inch the part of proud parents who had earned the right to be there. And then there was me. Discount dress, worn shoes, carrying a disposable camera I had picked up at a gas station because I couldn't afford anything better. I looked exactly like what I was, a single mother who had scraped together her last few dollars to witness her son's graduation. The family section was clearly marked, and I found my seat about 20 minutes before the ceremony began. I was scanning the crowd, looking for Kieran among the sea of graduation caps and gowns, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Delphine, I'm surprised to see you here." I turned around to find Cordelia Westbrook Hartwell, Bastian's wife, looking at me with what I could only describe as polite disdain. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves that screamed expensive salon treatment. "Cordelia," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Of course I'm here. It's my son's graduation." "Yes, well," she said, settling into the seat directly behind me with Bastian beside her. "Bastian wasn't sure you'd be able to make it. He knows money has been tight for you lately." The condescension in her voice was barely concealed. In her mind, I was the ex-wife who couldn't get her life together, the woman who had been left behind while Bastian moved on to bigger and better things. What she didn't know was that the only reason money was tight for me was because every penny I earned went towards supporting the very education we were all here to celebrate. Bastian looked uncomfortable. "Delphine, you look, well, it's good to see you." "Thank you, Bastian. You look successful as always." There was a moment of awkward silence before Cordelia spoke again. "We're so proud of Kieran. Bastian has worked so hard to make sure he could attend Stanford without any financial burden. It's wonderful when a father can provide that kind of security for his child." Each word felt like a small knife to my chest. I wanted to turn around and tell her exactly who had been providing that security, exactly whose sleepless nights and sacrificed meals had made this day possible. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in less than an hour my son was going to walk across that stage and receive his diploma, and that was the only thing that mattered. "Yes," I managed to say, "Kieran is very fortunate." The ceremony began with the traditional pomp and circumstance. The faculty processed in their academic regalia. The dean gave a speech about achievement and perseverance, and then they began calling names. I sat there with my cheap camera ready, waiting for the moment I had been dreaming about for 4 years. "Kieran Bastian Hartwell, summa cum laude, Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering." There he was, my son, tall, confident, beaming with pride as he walked across the stage. He looked so much like his father, but when he smiled I could see traces of myself in his expression. As he accepted his diploma and shook hands with the dean, I felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. This was why I had done everything. This moment, this achievement. This young man who was about to embark on a successful career, unburdened by student debt, free to pursue his dreams because someone had quietly, invisibly, made sure the path was clear for him. I took pictures with my disposable camera, knowing they would be grainy and poorly lit, but not caring. I had made it. Despite everything, despite the financial struggle and the loneliness and the countless nights when I wondered if it was all worth it, I had made it to this day. After the ceremony, there was a reception on the campus lawn. Families gathered around their graduates, taking professional photos and sharing stories about the journey that had brought them to this moment. I watched from the edges, not wanting to intrude on Kieran's time with his father and stepmother, but hoping he would find a moment to spend with me as well. But then Kieran stepped up to the microphone, and everything changed. I should have seen it coming. There had been signs during the reception setup that something special was planned. A small stage had been erected near the refreshment area, and I had noticed staff members testing audio equipment and arranging flowers. I had assumed it was for university officials, maybe the dean wanting to give additional remarks or announce some kind of scholarship fund. But as I watched my son adjust the microphone and scan the crowd with the confident bearing he had inherited from his father, I felt a flutter of maternal pride. Maybe he was going to thank his professors or his fellow graduates, or share some wisdom about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. I was so naive. "Could I have everyone's attention, please?" Kieran's voice carried across the reception lawn through the sound system, and gradually conversations died down as hundreds of people turned their attention toward the small stage. My heart swelled with pride, assuming he was going to give some kind of thank you speech on behalf of his graduating class. I was wrong, so completely, devastatingly wrong. Hi everyone, I'm Kieran Hartwell, and I just graduated summa cum laude thanks to the incredible support system I've had throughout my college years. The crowd applauded politely, and I found myself clapping along, beaming with maternal pride. But there's someone here today who deserves special recognition, someone whose sacrifices and dedication made this day possible. My heart stopped. For one impossible moment, I thought he was going to acknowledge me. I thought somehow, despite all my efforts to keep it secret, he had figured out the truth about who had been paying his tuition. My hands began to tremble as I watched him scan the crowd. Dad, could you come up here, please? The world tilted sideways. I watched in slow-motion horror as Bastien made his way through the crowd, looking surprised but pleased. Cordelia was glowing with pride, her perfect smile radiating satisfaction as her husband stepped onto the small stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Kieran continued, his voice warm with genuine affection, I want everyone to meet the most amazing father a son could ask for. This is Bastien Hartwell, and for the past 4 years, he has worked tirelessly to ensure that I could attend Stanford University without worrying about financial burden. The applause was thunderous. I felt like I was drowning in it, each clap echoing in my ears like a physical blow. Around me, people were smiling and nodding approvingly, moved by this touching display of filial gratitude. My father could have easily told me to take out student loans like most college students. He could have said that paying for Stanford was beyond his means. But instead, he made sacrifices. He worked extra hours, he saved every penny he could, and he made sure that I could focus on my studies instead of worrying about how I was going to pay for them. Every word was like acid in my veins. I watched Bastien on that stage, accepting praise for sacrifices he had never made, basking in credit for devotion he had never shown. The man who had fought to limit my custody, who had painted me as unreliable and unstable in court, who had spent the past 8 years living comfortably while I scraped together tuition payments, was being celebrated as the hero of my son's story. But it wasn't just the financial support, Kieran continued, and his voice was getting emotional now. Dad, you taught me the value of hard work, the importance of setting goals and achieving them. You showed me what it means to be a responsible man, a man who takes care of his family no matter what the cost. I felt physically ill. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Responsible, taking care of family. I had been working 3 jobs for 4 years, living on instant noodles and thrift store clothes, sacrificing every comfort and pleasure in my life to ensure Kieran's success. And he was praising his father for responsibilities that had been shouldered entirely by me. So I want to make a toast, Kieran said, raising a glass of champagne that someone had handed him. To Bastien Hartwell, the father who gave up his own comfort to invest in his son's future. To the man who showed me that love isn't just words, it's action. To the dad who paid for every semester, every textbook, every opportunity that brought me to this stage today. The crowd raised their glasses in unison. To Bastien, they chorused, and the sound of it was like breaking glass in my chest. I watched my ex-husband embrace our son on that stage, accepting congratulations for my sacrifice, receiving praise for my devotion. I watched Cordelia wiping away tears of pride, her face radiant with admiration for her husband's dedication. I watched hundreds of strangers celebrating a lie, moved by a story of paternal sacrifice that had never happened. And I realized that in that moment I had become completely invisible. The woman who had actually made this day possible, who had given up everything to ensure her son's success, who had loved him enough to let someone else take credit for her devotion, didn't exist in this narrative. In the story of Kieran's success, I was at best a footnote, at worst completely absent. The worst part wasn't even the financial aspect, though that stung deeply. The worst part was the praise for character traits that Bastien had never displayed toward me or toward Kieran, while our son was crediting his father with teaching him about sacrifice and responsibility. I was remembering the man who had refused to adjust his work schedule to attend Kieran's elementary school plays. The man who had scheduled business trips during Kieran's baseball games because his career was too important to interrupt for children's activities. The man who had fought for custody not because he wanted to be a better father, but because he couldn't stand the idea of paying child support. During our marriage, I had been the one who stayed up all night when Kieran had fever. I had been the one who learned to braid hair for school picture day, who researched the best elementary schools, who attended every parent-teacher conference and school board meeting. After our divorce, I had been the one who made sure Kieran felt loved and supported during our limited time together, who helped him process the emotional complexity of his parents' split, who encouraged his dreams even when I couldn't be there to see them achieved. But none of that mattered now. In this moment, in this story, Bastian was the hero and I was invisible. As the toast concluded and people began to disperse, chatting excitedly about the touching tribute they had just witnessed, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered. Something deeper. My sense of justice. My faith in the idea that good deeds eventually get recognized. My belief that love and sacrifice matter even when they go unacknowledged. I had spent 4 years telling myself that recognition didn't matter, that the only thing that mattered was Kieran's success. I had convinced myself that I could be satisfied with knowing privately that I had made his dreams possible, even if he never knew the truth. I had believed that love didn't require acknowledgement, that sacrifice was its own reward, that being a good mother meant putting my child's happiness above my own need for recognition. But watching him give credit to his father for my sacrifices, watching Bastian accept praise for a character he had never shown, watching my son attribute his success to a man who had contributed nothing to it, that was more than I could bear silently. The applause was still echoing in my ears as families began to move around the reception area, heading toward their graduates for photos and personal congratulations. I watched parents embracing their children, saw the joy and pride on faces throughout the crowd, and felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. People were starting to approach Kieran for individual congratulations, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could slip away quietly, drive back to Portland, and continue living with my secret. I could preserve the family harmony that my silence had maintained for 4 years. I could protect Kieran from the disillusionment that would come with learning the truth about who had really funded his education. Or I could speak up. I could tell the truth. I could finally, after 4 years of invisible sacrifice, claim credit for what I had done. But first, I needed to get out of there before I completely fell apart in front of hundreds of strangers. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what I was going to do with the truth that was burning inside me like a wildfire. I turned to leave, moving as quickly as I could through the crowd, when I heard Kieran's voice calling my name. "Mom! Mom, wait up!" I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't trust my face to hide what I was feeling, couldn't trust my voice to sound normal. When he reached me, slightly out of breath from jogging across the lawn in his graduation gown, I finally looked at him. "You're not leaving already, are you?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his eyes. "I wanted to spend some time with you, take some pictures together. This day wouldn't be complete without my mom here." The sincerity in his voice almost undid me completely. He meant it. Despite everything, despite the credit he had just given his father, despite the narrative that cast me as the struggling ex-wife on the periphery of his success, he still wanted me there. He still loved me, which made what I was about to do so much harder. "Kieran," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have alarmed him because his smile faded. "Mom, are you okay? You look really pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "But there's something I need to tell you, something important." He glanced back toward the reception, where I could see Bastian and Cordelia surrounded by well-wishers, still basking in the glow of his toast. "Can it wait a little bit? Dad and Cordelia are expecting me back for pictures, and then we're all going to dinner at—" "No," I interrupted. surprised by the firmness in my own voice. It can't wait. Not anymore. And Kieran studied my face for a moment, and I saw the exact moment when he realized this wasn't a conversation that could be postponed. Okay, he said quietly. Let's find somewhere private to talk. We walked in silence toward a quiet area of the campus, away from the celebration and the crowds. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. After 4 years of keeping this secret, I was about to reveal the truth, and I had no idea how he would react. We found a bench under a large oak tree, far enough from the reception that we could speak privately. Kieran sat down beside me, his graduation cap in his hands, looking confused and slightly worried. Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me a little. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I said these words, everything would change between us forever. Kieran, your father didn't pay for your education. He blinked at me, clearly not understanding. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Bastian didn't pay a single dollar of your Stanford tuition. Not one semester, not one textbook, not one dorm fee. He didn't make any sacrifices for your education. He doesn't even know how much it cost. The color was draining from Kieran's face. That's impossible. The scholarship only covered part of it, and Dad showed me his savings account statements. He's been putting money away for my education since I was little. Whatever he showed you, it wasn't being used for your tuition. I have every receipt, every payment confirmation, every financial aid document. For the past 4 years, I have paid every single expense related to your Stanford education. That's crazy, Kieran said, but his voice was getting quieter, less certain. Mom, you can barely afford your rent. You drive a 15-year-old car. You work 3 jobs just to make ends meet. How could you possibly afford Stanford tuition? You just answered your own question, I said, and my voice was shaking now. I work 3 jobs just to make ends meet because I've been paying $47,000 a semester to keep you in school. I drive a 15-year-old car because every penny I earn goes to your education. I can barely afford my rent because I've been choosing your future over my own stability for 4 years. The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. I could see him processing this information, trying to reconcile it with everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics. Show me, he said finally. I had anticipated this moment, though I had never imagined it would happen at his graduation. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had saved of every tuition payment, every financial aid document, every correspondence with Stanford's billing department. Kieran took my phone with trembling hands and began scrolling through the evidence. With each screenshot, each receipt, each official document bearing my name as the payer, I watched his face change. Confusion gave way to shock, then to something that looked like horror. This can't be real, he whispered. Mom, this is almost $200,000 over 4 years. How did you? I worked, I said simply. I worked constantly. Weekends, evenings, holidays. I took on clients I didn't want, jobs I hated, anything that would pay enough to cover your expenses. I ate instant noodles for dinner most nights because groceries were a luxury I couldn't afford. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 3 years. I turned down dates, vacations, social activities, anything that would cost money or time that should be spent earning money for your tuition. Kieran was staring at the phone screen, but I could tell he wasn't really seeing it anymore. But why didn't you tell me? Why did you let Dad take credit for all of this? Because I wanted you to have a relationship with your father. Because I didn't want you to feel guilty about the cost of your education. Because I thought... I paused, struggling to find the right words. Because I thought that as long as you were successful and happy, it didn't matter who got the credit. It doesn't matter? Kieran's voice was rising now, attracting looks from other families walking nearby. Mom, I just gave a speech in front of hundreds of people praising Dad for sacrifices you made. I toasted him for your generosity. I called him responsible and selfless when you're the one who has been responsible and selfless. I know, I said, and I could feel tears starting to come. I heard every word. Oh, God! Kieran buried his face in his hands. Oh, God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. All those times I praised Dad for working so hard to provide for me. All those times I felt grateful to him for taking care of my education. You must have felt terrible. It hurt, I admitted. But seeing you succeed, seeing you graduate today, knowing that you're going to start your career without the burden of student loans, that made it worth it. Kieran looked up at me, and there were tears in his eyes now. No, it wasn't worth it. Mom, you've been living in poverty while I attended one of the most expensive universities in the country. You've been sacrificing everything while I believed someone else was taking care of me. That's not worth it. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. But love isn't about fairness. It's about doing whatever it takes to give the people you care about the best possible chance at happiness. But I could have gone to a state school. I could have taken out loans. I could have worked part-time to help with expenses. You didn't have to carry this burden alone. Yes, I did, I said firmly. Because you're my son, and your success is more important to me than my own comfort. Because I wanted you to have every opportunity, every advantage I could possibly give you. Because that's what mothers do. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us crying now. Around us, the sounds of graduation celebration continued, but it felt like we were in our own private bubble of revelation and regret. What do I do now? Kieran asked finally. How do I face Dad after this? How do I deal with the fact that everything I believed about our family was wrong? That's up to you, I said. I'm not telling you this to turn you against your father. I'm telling you because I couldn't sit through another moment of him accepting credit for my sacrifices. But what you do with this information is your choice. Kieran was quiet for a long time, staring at the graduation cap in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was determined. I need to make this right. I need to tell people the truth. Kieran, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted. Mom, you've been invisible in the story of my success for too long. You've been letting other people take credit for your love and sacrifice while you stayed in the background. That ends today. Before I could stop him, he was standing up, walking back toward the reception with purposeful strides. I hurried to catch up with him, my heart pounding with anxiety about what he was planning to do. The reception was still in full swing when we arrived. Bastian and Cordelia were holding court near the stage, still receiving congratulations from other parents about Kieran's touching tribute. When Bastian saw us approaching, he smiled broadly. There's our graduate. People have been asking to meet the son who gave such a beautiful speech about his father. Kieran walked directly to the microphone, which was still set up from his earlier toast. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying across the lawn again. Could I have everyone's attention once more? The crowd began to quiet down, expecting perhaps another thank you speech or announcement. Bastian looked pleased, assuming his son wanted to add to the earlier tribute. Cordelia was practically glowing with continued pride. I need to make a correction to something I said earlier, Kieran began, and his voice was steady, despite the tears still visible on his face. I gave credit where credit wasn't due, and I need to set the record straight. I felt panic rising in my chest. Kieran, please, you don't have to do this. But he was already continuing. The person who paid for my Stanford education, who made the sacrifices that allowed me to graduate debt-free, who worked multiple jobs and lived in poverty to ensure my success, that person isn't my father. A murmur went through the crowd. Bastian's smile was fading, replaced by confusion and growing alarm. The person who deserves recognition for the sacrifices that made this day possible is my mother, Delphine Moreau. For 4 years, she has quietly, invisibly funded my entire education, while letting others take credit for her generosity. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Bastian's face went white, then red, then white again. Cordelia looked like she had been slapped. Around us, guests were whispering to each other, trying to process this unexpected revelation. Mom, Kieran said, turning to look directly at me. Would you please come up here? Every instinct I had told me to run, to disappear into the crowd, to avoid the public attention I had spent 4 years trying to avoid. But looking at my son's face, seeing the love and gratitude and determination there, I found myself walking toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Kieran said as I joined him at the microphone, This is the woman who actually made my education possible. This is the parent who worked 3 jobs, lived on instant noodles, and gave up every luxury to ensure I could attend Stanford University. This is the person who deserves your applause and admiration. The response was overwhelming. The applause was thunderous. But more than that, I could see the emotional impact on the faces in the crowd. Parents who understood the magnitude of the sacrifice I had made, who recognized the depth of love it represented, who were genuinely moved by the truth of what had happened. As the applause continued, I looked out at the crowd and found Bastian and Cordelia. They were no longer the center of attention, no longer basking in unearned praise. Bastian looked devastated, finally understanding the extent of his ex-wife's sacrifice and his own failure to provide for his son. Cordelia looked angry and embarrassed, her perfect facade cracking under the weight of public revelation. But in that moment, I didn't care about their discomfort. For the first time in 4 years, I was being recognized for what I had actually done. For the first time since my divorce, I was being seen as the devoted parent I had always been. Kiran put his arm around me as the applause finally died down. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said into the microphone. "This woman didn't tell me the truth about paying for my education because she wanted me to have a good relationship with my father. She sacrificed not just her financial security, but also recognition and credit for her sacrifices, because she thought it would be better for me. That's not just generosity. That's the purest form of love I've ever witnessed." I was crying openly now, but for the first time in months, these weren't tears of pain or frustration. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of finally being seen for who I really was and what I had actually done. As we left the stage together, Kiran took my hand. "Mom, I have a lot to make up for. 4 years of thanking the wrong person, 4 years of not understanding what you were doing for me. But I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how grateful I am." Looking back now, 3 months later, I can say that day changed everything between us. Not just because the truth finally came out, but because Kiran truly understood for the first time what love looks like when it asks for nothing in return. The aftermath wasn't easy. Bastian was forced to confront the reality that he had been taking credit for sacrifices he never made, accepting praise for character he hadn't demonstrated. The conversation we had later that evening was one of the most difficult of my life, but also one of the most necessary. He had followed us back to my hotel room. Yes, Kiran had insisted on paying for a hotel room for me that night, horrified that I had planned to sleep in my car, and demanded an explanation. Not an apology, mind you, an explanation. He wanted to know why I had humiliated him in public, why I had undermined his relationship with his son, why I had kept such a significant secret for 4 years. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours, and by the end of it, we had both said things that had been festering for years. Bastian accused me of being manipulative, of using Kiran's education as a way to make him look bad. I accused him of being so self-centered that he had never once considered what my life was actually like after our divorce. "You want to know why?" I had asked him, exhausted beyond measure, but finally able to speak my truth. "Because I wanted our son to respect his father. Because I thought it was more important for Kiran to have a good relationship with you than for me to get credit for my sacrifices. Because I believed that what mattered was his success, not who got the recognition for making it possible." Bastian had stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face that might have been shame. But then his expression hardened again. "You could have told me. We could have worked something out, shared the costs." "Could we have?" I challenged him. "When during the past 8 years have you ever asked about my financial situation? When have you ever inquired about whether I was struggling? When have you ever offered to help with anything related to Kiran's needs beyond what the divorce decree required?" He didn't have an answer for that, because we both knew the truth. In his mind, I was the ex-wife who had been taken care of in the divorce settlement. The fact that my small settlement had been exhausted within 2 years of legal fees and moving expenses had never occurred to him. The possibility that I might be sacrificing for our son's benefit had never crossed his mind. because he had never bothered to consider what my life was actually like. "I thought you were doing fine," he said finally, and his voice was quieter now. "I thought your business was successful. You never asked for help, because asking for help from you felt like admitting defeat, because you had already painted me as unreliable and irresponsible in court, because I was terrified that if you knew I was struggling financially, you would use it as evidence that Kieran would be better off spending even less time with me." That was the moment when something shifted in Bastian's expression. For the first time since our divorce, he looked at me and seemed to really see me, not as the ex-wife who had disappointed him, not as the obstacle to his perfect new life, but as a person who had been carrying an enormous burden alone. "I didn't know," he said, and there was something that might have been regret in his voice. "Delphine, I honestly didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know." It was easier to believe that I was doing fine, that Kieran's education was being taken care of by mysterious scholarships and your own savings, that everyone was happy with the arrangement. It was easier than acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, the woman you divorced wasn't the irresponsible person you had convinced yourself she was. Cordelia, unsurprisingly, was less gracious about the revelation. She accused me of orchestrating the whole thing for attention, of deliberately embarrassing them in public. "You could have had this conversation privately," she said, her voice icy with disdain. "You didn't have to humiliate Bastian in front of hundreds of people." "I didn't orchestrate anything," I replied, too tired to be angry anymore. Kieran chose to tell the truth. He chose to give credit where credit was due. If that was humiliating for Bastian, maybe he should examine why the truth about his ex-wife's sacrifices feels like a personal attack. "Because it makes him look bad," Cordelia snapped. "Because it makes people question what kind of father he really is." "Maybe," I said quietly. "That's a question worth asking." The conversation with Kieran was different, longer, more painful, but ultimately more healing. We talked through the night, sitting in that hotel room that felt like the most luxurious accommodation I had experienced in years. He wanted to understand everything: how I had managed the payments, why I had kept it secret, what my life had been like for the past 4 years, what I had given up, what I had sacrificed. When I told him about working multiple jobs, about living on instant noodles for months at a time, about choosing his tuition over my own basic needs, he cried. When I described sleeping in my car, in Walmart parking lots, during my rare visits to see him at Stanford, because I couldn't afford a hotel, he put his head in his hands. When I explained that I had been wearing the same 5 outfits in rotation for years, because every available dollar went to his education, he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Mom, I could have gone to a state school. I could have taken out loans. I could have worked part-time to help with expenses. You didn't have to carry this burden alone. But I wanted you to have the best," I explained. "I wanted you to have every opportunity, every advantage I could possibly give you. And I wanted you to be able to focus on your studies instead of worrying about money, at the cost of your own well-being, at the cost of your own dreams, at the cost of your own life." I had to think about that question for a while. Had I given up my own dreams? Or had my dreams simply evolved to center around his success? The truth was probably somewhere in between. I had always wanted to expand my graphic design business, maybe open a small studio, perhaps teach design classes at the community college. But those dreams had been set aside, postponed indefinitely, while I focused on the more immediate goal of ensuring Kieran's future. "My dreams changed," I said finally. "For 4 years, my biggest dream was seeing you walk across that graduation stage. And that dream came true today. But what about your dreams for yourself? What about your own happiness, your own future?" It was a question I hadn't allowed myself to consider for a very long time. For 4 years, my future had been defined entirely by Kieran's present needs. I had lived semester to semester, payment to payment, never looking beyond the next tuition deadline. Now, suddenly, I was free to think about what I wanted for myself. Kieran insisted on paying me back, but I refused. "The education was my gift to you," I told him, "freely given out of love. I don't want you to start your career feeling like you owe me money. I want you to start your career feeling like you're loved and supported. But Mom, you've been living in poverty while I attended one of the most expensive universities in the country. That's not fair. Fairness isn't the point, sweetheart. Love isn't about fairness. It's about doing whatever it takes to give the people you care about the best possible chance at happiness. But he was determined to make changes, and I have to admit, I was grateful for them. He helped me find a better apartment in a safer neighborhood with actual amenities, like a dishwasher and central air conditioning. He bought me a reliable car to replace my dying Honda, a certified pre-owned Toyota that felt like a luxury vehicle compared to what I had been driving. Most importantly, he makes sure I know every day how much my sacrifices meant to him. But the changes in our relationship go beyond material improvements. For the first time since his childhood, Kieran makes an effort to understand my perspective, to see me as a complete person rather than just Mom. He asks about my work, my interests, my goals for the future. He includes me in his life in ways that he never did when he thought his father was the responsible parent, and I was just the struggling ex-wife on the periphery. We have dinner together every week now, something we hadn't done regularly since before the divorce. He tells me about his job, his co-workers, his plans for the future. I tell him about the new clients I'm taking on, the design classes I'm considering teaching, the small business I'm slowly rebuilding now that I can actually invest in it instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. The most beautiful part of all of this? Kieran learned something that day about the difference between the love that demands recognition and the love that gives without expecting anything in return. He learned that the greatest sacrifices are often the invisible ones, made by people who care more about your success than their own comfort. He also learned something about integrity, about the importance of giving credit where credit is due, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient, about the difference between accepting praise you've earned and accepting praise that belongs to someone else, about the courage it takes to tell the truth when the truth challenges people's assumptions about who deserves recognition and respect. And me? I learned that sometimes the truth has its own timeline. Sometimes love requires patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to remain invisible until the moment comes when invisibility is no longer possible. I learned that keeping secrets to protect other people's feelings isn't always the kindest choice. Sometimes it's the choice that enables them to continue living in a false reality that ultimately hurts everyone involved. I also learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. For 4 years, I had felt like I was barely surviving, constantly on the edge of financial and emotional collapse. But looking back, I realized that I wasn't just surviving, I was succeeding. I was accomplishing something extraordinary, something that required tremendous strength and determination and love. I was single-handedly funding an Ivy League education while maintaining my dignity, my integrity, and my relationship with my son. That graduation day, when my son toasted the wrong parent in front of hundreds of people, broke my heart. But it also freed me from a secret that had been weighing me down for 4 years. It showed me that love doesn't always get the recognition it deserves immediately, but eventually the truth finds its way to the surface. It taught me that silence isn't always golden, that sometimes speaking up is not just necessary, but vital for everyone's growth and understanding. Most importantly, it taught both of us that real love isn't about who gets the credit. It's about being willing to give everything you have for someone else's happiness, even if they never know you're the one giving it. But it's also about being honest about that love, about allowing the people you love to see the full extent of your devotion so they can appreciate it and learn from it and hopefully, someday, pay it forward. Today, Kieran calls me every day, not out of guilt, but out of genuine appreciation for the mother who loved him enough to remain invisible until visibility became necessary. He tells his friends about what I did, shares the story as an example of unconditional love, and makes sure that everyone in his life knows exactly who made his success possible. He includes me in his plans, asks for my advice, and treats me like the important person in his life that I always was, but that he had never fully recognized. 6 months after graduation, we attended his company's holiday party together. When his boss asked him about his background, Kieran told the whole story, not to embarrass his father, but to make sure people understood the sacrifices that had made his success possible. Several people came up to me that night to tell me they were amazed by what I had done, that they couldn't imagine making such sacrifices for so long without recognition, and that, more than any public recognition, more than any toast or applause, is worth every sacrifice I ever made. Because in the end, the greatest gift I gave my son wasn't just a debt-free education. It was the knowledge that he is deeply, truly, completely loved, and the understanding of what that kind of love looks like in action. It was a lesson in integrity, in gratitude, in the importance of seeing and acknowledging the people who make our successes possible. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never spoken up, if I had let Bastien continue to receive credit for my sacrifices. Would Kieran have ever understood the true cost of his education? Would he have learned the lessons about love and sacrifice that he carries with him now? Would our relationship have ever evolved beyond the limited dynamic that had defined it since the divorce? I don't think so. And that's why I know that speaking up, painful as it was the right choice. Not just for me, but for Kieran, and ultimately even for Bastien, who needed to confront the reality of his own limitations as a father and as a man. The truth I've learned really does set you free, even when it breaks your heart first. Demonstrated. The conversation we had later that evening was one of the most difficult of my life, but also one of the most necessary. Cordelia, unsurprisingly, was less gracious about the revelation. She accused me of orchestrating the whole thing for attention, of deliberately embarrassing them in public. But her opinion stopped mattering to me the moment my son stood up and told the truth. Kieran insisted on paying me back, but I refused. The education was my gift to him, freely given out of love. Instead, he's been making sure I'm finally taking care of myself. He helped me find a better apartment, bought me a reliable car, and most importantly, he makes sure I know every day how much my sacrifices meant to him. The most beautiful part of all of this? Kieran learned something that day about the difference between the love that demands recognition and the love that gives without expecting anything in return. He learned that the greatest sacrifices are often the invisible ones, made by people who care more about your success than their own comfort. And me? I learned that sometimes the truth has its own timeline. Sometimes love requires patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to remain invisible until the moment comes when invisibility is no longer possible. That graduation day, when my son toasted the wrong parent in front of hundreds of people, broke my heart. But it also freed me from a secret that had been weighing me down for 4 years. It showed me that love doesn't always get the recognition it deserves immediately, but eventually, the truth finds its way to the surface. Most importantly, it taught both of us that real love isn't about who gets the credit. It's about being willing to give everything you have for someone else's happiness, even if they never know you're the one giving it. Today, Kieran calls me every day, not out of guilt, but out of genuine appreciation for the mother who loved him enough to remain invisible until visibility became necessary. And that, more than any public recognition, more than any toast or applause, is worth every sacrifice I ever made.